So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the second tabernacle services are refined in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage, so we can understand the time of the end period Shiach the prophet. We find then the layer of understanding of the instructions regarding then the time of the restoration of the holy cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. So what can we understand of the holy cities? Let's try to clarify what the cities mean. The cities then of the Messiah are not related with the Gentile level. But then we have to understand in what level we're speaking of. In terms of control of the market, there is no relation with the holy cities. The main purpose of the holy cities is then obviously the promotion of more cities. Then those 7 cities of Asia Minor must get back on duty. From then on, more holy cities until Jerusalem then is restored. As far as the restoration of Jerusalem, there are principles where then we must establish a line of understanding from the holy instructions. Zechariah, there is a very interesting section related with tabernacling, then making a reference of the set apart people, then making route from the holy cities to Jerusalem to observe the feasts. This area, however, is going to be very, not secret, but not very, what's the word? Not on the spotlight. It's kind of under the shadows. So the understanding is not very relevant, because it relates with tabernacling and then the salvation of the Gentiles, obviously, but then the sections of the development of the holy cities are not going to be on a spotlight. What is on the spotlight is trade. So then when the Messiah speaks on Galah 1:8, we understand why. The Messiah, first he makes a reference of then and the freighters of the earth on the 8th chapter, and then 1:8 he simply states, "Come out of them, my people, so you would not be destroyed with the rest of them." What the Messiah is saying is the system of the trade is going to be so popular that person can no longer deny the fact of trade being so consuming the people. Mostly it is set apart because the Messiah himself makes a reference of the system. However, from the Messiah viewpoint, or from the Messiah's viewpoint, we find then his first reference regarding trade. So as far as the world is concerned, they should not be concerned with the holy cities whatsoever. The main objective of the holy cities is simply then promoting more holy cities, giving directives as you are listening to this audio, simply directives, but then rescuing the set apart, making sure they cluster, form other holy cities, and then Jerusalem is going to be then pruned as per then the instructions of Zechariah. So no big deal as far as we can understand, because the trade of the end is already lined up. So then as far as we can say, related with the holy cities, those who are enlightened, then obviously they're going to show up for more understandings. Those who are not enlightened, they're going to be doing trade. But then, at the moment, at least the world has a clear path of what's expected of them. However, nations and kingdoms should be very concerned of learning these very crucial steps of formation as far as the trade of the end. Any miscalculation can be extremely costly, mainly because the market is very fragile. Europe is very fragile. We understand from Daniel the prophet, related then with many nations would try to come together and adhere to each other, but they would not. Speaks of the time of deceit, where then we hear the phrase of New World Order. There is no such. As far as we can understand, tabernacling, then we find the cities of the Messiah returning. But the New World Order, it is a term because it excludes tabernacling. So let's make sure we don't get confused the new system coming with the New World Order. They have no link. They have no link because there is then a set of directives given by the holy cities. So it's not required then a new world order. On the contrary. And then don't forget, leave some space for the Ishmaelites also, because then at some point, because of the developments, crude is going to be very important. So later in the future, the Ishmaelites then obviously are going to be very prominent because of crude. Thus then when we read Ezekiel the 37th chapter, you understand then the two sticks, stick of authority of the sons of Ibrahim, Ishmael, and also Yitzhak, trade and tabernacling coming then as a team. But then as far as trade, then the scripture then provides us with very solid warnings as far as be very cautious with the investments. Any miscalculation can be absolutely disastrous. There is only a way to work during this time of the restoration, and those understandings were given. Any try of changing the sequence of these can be very costly and won't work. It must be done in a certain way as it was explained before. The 11th chapter relates with the base of the statue, where then iron or irons then relate with each other, and the rest of them is clay. The rest of the countries of the world, besides the first, second, and third kingdoms, the rest of them are clay. Those are not considered because they are not part of the main bulk of those first, second, and third kingdoms. It is true, many nations, they are going to become providers, for instance, of metals, of materials. But as far as we understand from the instructions, the other countries won't be relevant. The relevancy of then the first, second, and third kingdoms mostly comes from the kingdom of the north. If investors, people trying to come up with their own companies, starting up companies, or then related with the energy. What we understand as far as making any deals from A until Z, where then is provided materials, transportation, provided then the final material that goes to China, mostly comes from the Kingdom of the North. Because we must establish a reason, understanding the exports of the Soviet Union at the moment. There is then in the internet you find then a very low level of exports. Plus, if you understand the monetary exchange of ruble versus then the US monetary system, a ruble does not even amount as 10 cents. So based upon the exports and then the value of their money, must have a very strong reason. Then when we begin our reading of Daniel the 11th chapter, then we find these Kingdom of the North higher than the first. The only way of understanding this is then Daniel couple of chapters later, where then China hires the Northern Kingdom as the manager. Then China becomes obviously only a factory, and then the manager provides what is required. But then the most important also, after these, after providing China with the oil and gas, then the relationship of the northern and southern kingdoms. Lots of skirmishes. And obviously, what can you expect from a couple of fierce type of people? Skirmishes. But then the 11th chapter provides the answer. The northern kingdom shall endure. It does not mean the southern kingdom is going to be abandoned. That's not the point. Because then the northern kingdom was hired as a manager. Obviously the southern kingdom then lines up. But then there is another factor related with the Pacific. As then the northern, eastern, and southern kingdoms then, they make up the main engine of this primary starting of the system, because we must understand the BRICS, they have their own banking. So indicating then a pre-showing of the system. So when these then becomes very popular amongst themselves and working as a nice lubricated watch, then a few more developments are very obvious. One of them is Panama Canal. You can observe already in the future the Soviets making a deal with the Panama Canal, or then the Panamanian government. Then you can understand, using then the funding of China, because China wants the investments, but then it requires a leading edge coming from the management. Then you can understand, for instance, the Chinese freighting style, then comes Singaporean style from the Pacific, coming then reaching New Zealand, Australia, and then obviously then Panama. Because the main idea then, understanding from the viewpoint of the northern kingdom, is tackled in northern Brazil. It's another vast area, extremely rich with minerals, extremely important for the development of the world. But then understanding the freighting system of Brazil somewhat is yet, international speaking, very precarious. So what can a person understand is then, obviously, ores coming from Brazil, either via raw ores or raw materials, or then smeltered, being delivered to the Panama Canal, and then from there to China. So then we understand there is a circle of management coming from the north, and then tackles obviously the main kingdoms, and then shortly after, then comes from the Pacific, because the Pacific is already lined up. If you were a person listening to shortwave radio stations, 31 meters or 25 meters, you can understand a short while ago it was absolutely humming with information regarding the new system. You have to understand the content, the context, but then you understand the system already trying to line up itself. But there are a few problems, because China can't make a deal directly with Africa. Not this time. Previously they had done it, and there are signs that they did. But the problem is the market is becoming very unstable. And because Africa is extremely rich, the situation must be so as then for the northern kingdom to tackle then the southern kingdom. There is no other way of doing it. It has to be fierce people with fierce people, and then China must remain obviously secluded doing trade. So their example of trade and then production becomes intact and example for the other nations. Then we find later then obviously from the Pacific continuing what China wanted to do previously. But every time China makes a step forward comes then the Balians. Then the Balians try to screw up what the Chinese every time trying to do it. But then from the Pacific then there is another section. At the moment we understand, per the economy and per decisions made, New Zealand would be the best place for the South Pacific trading post. Unfortunately, Australia made some very bad decisions lately. There are many updates of education, and then the military expenses, they are already short 7.5 B, and that's a lot of money, besides the fact that they are projecting what they think they are going to earn, but they start out as with a huge hole prior of going forward with it. You know what this means? Money printing festival. When there was the visit over there in China, the Balians came together and said, oh, what the heck, we then simply projected what comes in the future, we make some calculations and print out more money. So unfortunately Australia made some very bad decisions. But we have then the hope of in September maybe Tony becoming the Prime Minister, because there was some skirmishes over there with the Prime Minister and also the Labour Party, where then the voting was very close. It was 52 versus 48%. So Tony has 48% of the opinion. If he takes over then in September, then the situation might change. But as it is, very obvious, New Zealand would be the best trading post. This means then huge port. Taking the example, for instance, of either China or Singapore, and making then a distribution center in the South Pacific. Because then when the system comes then shortly, next 36 months, when it becomes available for the other people, then the islands over there of the Pacific, they want their parcels. Then you can understand the freighters coming up with their understandings and making sure they have their management set up, and then New Zealand becoming then an area of refueling, an area of depot, lots of depot for the freighter companies, extension of the port, and truly a trading post, where then the freighters would gather over there to get the distribution for the islands. And then from there coming towards the west. As far as the Eurozone, disaster. because Daniel already predicted from a long time ago. He said they would try to come together during the time of the seat. Try to understand, it's not only coming together. Because besides speaking of those countries coming together, during this time of the restoration, we are speaking of a world coming together. So what is the distinction? It's the timing and the season. Previously, prior to 2009, we were speaking during the time of the seat, where the holy cities were not around. So then the countries of the Europe, they tried to come together under their own understanding of religion and state at the same time. Obviously it would not work. So any investment in Europe is extremely unwise. Any link with the Eurozone is very unwise. Because when the system of the Chinese becomes available for other countries, the other systems must become subsystems. And any linkage with the subsystems where you mix then distinct cultures. Some of them are strong, some of them are weak, and then imbalance starts. And then rather than those countries that are weak investing in their own services and improvements, they use then the subsystem to force the subsystem rich countries to pay for those who are weak, because they take their money, they pay for those who are weak, and then the weak countries, though they are earning in the system of the new Chinese system, they don't pay their dues. You know what this means? Temptation. Everybody is susceptible to temptations, yet generates instability. So then, as far as the United States, printing money festival. If we don't do our homework, if we don't clean up our monstrosity of government, if we don't start to line up our government with the freighters, instant taxation system of products coming to this country, then there is no hope. No hope, because the Messiah said the freighters of the earth would be in charge. So as we can understand, we can't jump around anymore. There is a definite schedule already set from centuries ago. And then we are neglecting the very basics. We are neglecting the IMF reports, absolutely deadly. We are not doing our homework. Instead of cleaning up, we are then inflating even more the federal government. It's becoming a monstrosity beyond measure. And we are not producing as a nation. So we can't go beyond the very areas where we came from. And then expecting there is some sort of a force that's going to take us out of trouble? Absolutely not. Doesn't exist. So the only solution is combining what Margaret Thatcher did, as far as cleaning up our government. Make sure then those agencies not relevant must be privatized or turned into the private sector. So the government then releases itself from the responsibilities. And then obviously those money giving around the world should be absolutely halted. And then we can work in our own economy. Extracting our own petroleum, taking care of electricity, and then reviving our robust industry. So we can become then an industry available for the usage of the new market coming. So the agenda is very much set. The only question mark became at the moment is regarding the United States and Europe. These two areas of the world are very troublesome. Don't expect much from them. Not until the United States then starts leaning up and Europe then dismantled the Eurozone. Then the investors can count with both sides of these sections of the planet. Otherwise, it's very unwise making an investment. There are already 12 digits people absolutely dumping US stocks. And they are warning the other investors not to believe the reports coming from the United States. Unfortunately, because we've become a nation printing out so much money and with no regard of the consequences. Our monetary system devalued 80% from the gold standard of the 80s. 80%. The only reason why the money does not change its face is because rather than placing more zeros at the end of it, we are printing in quantity. But goes so far. A while back then, the Prime Minister of Israel mentioned, as far as America, 2 years ago, some 5 years would be the most we would be able to do this. Lines up with IMF reports. So when you unite IMF and then the Prime Minister of Israel, speaking of the same time period, plus then the understanding of the prophecies, it becomes absolutely solid. So troublesome areas then, absolutely sure, Europe and then United States. Because Central America, we understand, Panama Canal, huge area of growth. South America, they are part of the BRICS, plus then the Mercosur. You can expect a lot of developments. Amazon area, absolutely replete with minerals. And then Africa, used to be a question mark, no longer is a question mark. We understand precisely what's coming. Mr. Zuma became the person responsible for the entire continent of Africa. He has to come up with an idea of his own, gather those leaders of the other countries, and come up with a plan. First then is a plan of road construction, from the mines directly to the ports. Then obviously the Soviet Union would provide trucks, for instance, Crass, very robust trucks to at least take the ores from the mines to the port, or very crude type of smeltering system, because Africa has huge deposits of crude and also coal. It's very easy producing then energy to smelter and then send the product already smelter to China. Very simple steps. If you observe then what it takes to get the system going is extremely simple. But then Mr. Zuma has to come up with an idea. I don't know what he has in mind. But when the order comes from the north, what must be done, then he has to come up with some sort of idea of his own, because you know what, in the next few months ships are start coming to the port. The ores or then the final product must be at the port. This is as far as the instruction is going to go. So the time is extremely important. What wasn't doable in the past, it is doable at the moment, because then we are on a schedule. We are waiting then for the first holy city on the land of Cush, and during this time then the Gentiles are organizing themselves. So the only question marks thus far is United States and Europe. The rest of the world, It's very much organized. Because the main powers, for instance, obviously Soviet Union should be first. Then you find China. Then you find Brazil. Then you find India. And then South Africa. But then try to understand when these primary engine starts of the kingdoms, then later the whole world is going to be included in this system. So what start out as with a group of people or nations, in the near future the whole globe is going to be involved with it. But the first step is then obviously China hiring the services of the Northern Kingdom in exchange for oil and gas. It is absolutely crucial. Any other deviation from these is extremely dangerous, because then it does not line up with instructions. Because Baal and the dragon must be in line. And the only way you can line up dragon and the Baal is by having a manager places under the control the disorganized Baalian system. So we are in Moscow time. The next step is the relationship of China and the Soviet Union, providing oil and gas in exchange for being the manager. The next step is the Northern Kingdom and Mr. Zuma. Then Mr. Zuma organizes then the presidents of the other countries of Africa. From then on, roads everywhere. And it's very simple. If a country of Africa doesn't know how to construct a road, then they are retarded. Because it takes a tractor, rocks, smash them down, providing a road, very crude. Crash trucks of the Soviet Union, transports to the smelter. Smelter the ore, comes out, final product, loads in ships, goes to China. Couldn't be any simpler. And there is no shortage of money. As long as when the schedule comes, the ship docks, make sure then the product is there waiting for the ship. Then their own banking already linked up comes then from China, comes through then the Northern Kingdom and lands in Africa. But then, let's understand the couple of question marks at the moment, United States and Europe. Europe, we already have an understanding that they're going to break. But the question mark comes in the United States because there is a huge money printing festival. Our government unfortunately lost its wits. And unfortunately there is nearly no way of changing the mind of the politicians. They are enjoying each other's incompetence, and the people are nearly in poverty. Because any country, when they are in financial trouble, the first step is privatization, or they get rid of those agencies causing expenses. But in this country, for some reason, they do the contrary. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And then on top of it, we are not producing. And the more time goes, the more monstrosity the government becomes, the more expenses. And then we found out they were building these Ozarks building over there. They hid from the people. And now the people are becoming aware of the government has plans then shortly to change the capital of the United States, then to the Ozarks, because they think they're going to manage our troubles from the midst of the forest. The problem is the freighters, when the time comes, they won't let the government do this. Because the freighters of our country, they're going to take charge. Because the U.S. government has proven itself unworthy. They have no control. The U.S. government is not unkind. But they are so nice sometimes, they lost a track. So then leaning up of the government is absolutely a must. They should be done this a long time ago. Should have, a long time ago. But it wasn't done. Agents, for instance, FAA could be gone. Agriculture Department could be gone. FDA could be gone. TSA, absolutely a must, be gone. DHS, accepted the Secret Services. USPS is very profitable if they imitate what UPS is doing. USPS not having stores of their own, but then hiring civilians to do then the storing for them. It's extremely profitable because we understand then when the system becomes available for the rest of the world, freighting is going to be the utmost important. But yet it's a question mark as far as North America. North America and Europe, they are absolutely question marks. No decent investor of either 6 or 12 digits people should, under any condition, making an investment in those parts of the world. Because they don't know what's going to be like. We understand the Europeans, the Eurozone must break. And in North America, simply we don't know. The government's not leaning up. They are doing the contrary, what is normal. So we are walking backwards into the future. But at least the Holy Instructions has given us a line of trade and schedule. So at least the investors, they have an idea what is coming in the near future. But the whole starting point is then with China and Soviet Union, then China given the management position, and then in exchange they receive oil and gas. That's the first step. Then afterwards, we find then the 11th chapter of Daniel, where then the northern becomes then very strong friendship with the south. Mostly Mr. Zuma. And then the rest of the countries, they should be on hold. Until this main engine of the system becomes very evident, the other investors should hold their money. Either they start up their own freighting companies, because it's absolutely sure, because when the Messiah said the freighters of the earth would be in charge. So if an investor has money and in quote ants in the pants to use their money, then start up a freighting company. And if you truly want to step further, start a freight company then in New Zealand. Because the reaction is what you would expect would be for the Northern Kingdom making a deal with Mr. Zuma. Then Mr. Zuma has to put his rear in gear. Then he has to visit with the other leaders of the African continent and come up with roads. That's what he have to do. Then comes, obviously, then the Pacific. But then the Pacific is very much lined up because China is working on it for a long time. Then afterwards, a couple of situations. Must be established a trading post in the South Pacific. The best at the moment is New Zealand. And then obviously the next point would be the management of the Northern Kingdom with Panama. And then from Panama comes then Brazil. Because you have to have a trading post in Panama, because Brazil does not have yet a very strong international trading system. Lacks ships, yet at the moment there is a very huge deposit of petroleum in Brazil, but they are doing with the pilot ships at the moment. They are talking about then the rights of the deposits, and then it drags. It simply drags. Balian system always drags. Then you can understand, ships, they are built very slowly. So the indication is because of the distance, obviously they're going to build not big ships or medium-sized ships, but then short route from Amazon then to Panama. Then the larger ships would dock in Panama and then bring the smeltered minerals then to China. Or similar line of understanding. Because the idea is not only coming to the country where they can have then the smeltered product, is then activating other trading posts, because we must understand freighters must make use of strategic points in the earth for the delivery of parcels. So we can understand Central America becomes then a trading post. Includes then South America, then the reaches of the Amazon, and then the Amazon highway from east and west and north and south. Then there is a trading post in Panama. Then you find a trading post in South Pacific. Then comes the United States. Nobody knows yet, because as we can understand, it's disastrous. Our government, unfortunately, they do what is contrary to what's normal. Time of cleanup, then they try to inflate the government even further. Does not make any sense. Then they are spending what they don't have. They don't have any budget, no control. It's crazy. And then Europe is another question mark. So the best time of investment in Europe would be when then the Chinese system becomes available for the rest of the world, shortly in the next 36 months. Because then the system of the Eurozone must then absolutely be dismantled, or it becomes a disaster. Because then as the system becomes available in the computers, people are going to start investing. Then the areas of interest in Europe obviously, you can understand Germany, France, and then establishing trading posts over there also. So then the future is defined. Other than the United States and Europe, the rest of it is defined. And it's in line with the scripture. Most importantly, obviously. So we are waiting for Mr. Putin's movements. There is nothing else can be done at the moment.